They called me a witch. In 2024. With smartphones in their pockets and Wi-Fi in their homes, they whispered I cursed their cows, bewitched their babies, and hexed their marriages. But what they didn't know was that I had cameras in my scarecrows, and the last spell I cast was a legal contract. You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you, but every word is true. My name is Ruthin Clark. I'm 62 years old. I live on 83 acres of inherited land in rural Missouri, where old churches outnumber grocery stores and gossip spreads faster than wildfire. After my husband died, I lived alone on that land, growing vegetables, raising chickens, minding my own business. Until one day, my cousin Elsie told me over coffee, "You know, folks been saying you got a dark spirit in you, Ruth." I laughed. I thought it was one of those old town jokes. Until it wasn't. It started slow. One of my nephews claimed his daughter got sick after visiting my farm. A pipe burst in my sister's basement, and she blamed me for manifesting rot. Then came the letters, handwritten notes from supposed spiritual advisors warning that I carried a generational curse. That I was the reason bad luck followed the family. One even claimed they saw me burying a dead bird under a moonless sky. Except, I hadn't even left my house that night. I had a cold. I was in bed with NyQuil. I knew something was off. So I started checking the handwriting on those letters, and wouldn't you know, they matched my niece's Christmas card from 2 years ago. I started digging. I discovered staged photos, my clothes taken off a drying line and arranged in a ritual circle. A burned doll placed outside my front porch. And then I found it. My sister-in-law had visited the county mental health board, trying to report me for hallucinatory behavior. She said I believed I could control animals and influence weather patterns. I grow herbs. I make tea. That's it. But they were painting me like something out of a horror movie. Why? My land. That's all it ever was. My father had made me sole heir, and they wanted it split. With new development coming to town, my woods were prime real estate. And they wanted me out. If I was declared mentally unfit or dangerous due to occult behavior, they thought the land would default to the next of kin. A 2024 witch trial without the fire. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called a friend of mine who worked with a small indie film crew out of St. Louis. I told them, "You want a real story? I got one." We set up hidden cameras. I wired my porch light. My chicken coop. Even the tree stump where my cousin liked to smoke and gossip. What we captured. Them planning it all. My own blood, laughing about how they'd claim I froze their brakes with my moon tea. I even got footage of my nephew planting a hex symbol made of twigs in my garden. Idiots didn't know my scarecrow had night vision. And here's where it got juicy. The documentary didn't just expose them, it humiliated them. The witch who outsmarted them all premiered at a local film festival and went viral on TikTok. People couldn't believe it was real. But I had signed affidavits, footage, even voice memos. I spun their lies into gold. And the money I made? Well, let's just say I don't grow vegetables anymore. I own 3 more plots and lease them to organic farmers. My family tried to sue for defamation. But I had every recording, every lie, every thread of their fake curses laid bare. The judge looked at them like they were cartoon villains. I didn't just win. I cursed them with truth. So next time someone tells you witches don't exist, tell them you met one. The kind that wields cameras instead of cauldrons. And wins in court instead of caves. Because in 2024, truth is the most dangerous spell of all. If you've ever been called crazy, a liar, or worse, just because someone wanted what you had, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe my channel. I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's expose every lie, together. They say paranoia is a sign of guilt. But in my case, paranoia saved my life and my land. The day I realized things were escalating was the morning I found my dog's food bowl laced with crushed pills. Not just any pills, but prescription antipsychotics. I keep the bottle. I checked the batch number. They weren't mine. That's when it hit me, they weren't just trying to convince the town I was losing my mind. They were trying to make me lose it. Medically. Legally. Permanently. So I decided, if they wanted a witch, I'd become a prophet, with cameras and receipts. I knew I had to protect myself, and I also knew no one would believe a 62-year-old widow with calloused hands and a chicken coop over a well-spoken family who dressed like churchgoers and smiled too wide. So I got smart. My scarecrow, Old Henry, who'd guarded the West Field for years, got an upgrade. I stitched a mini GoPro into the seam of his neck and wired it to a solar-powered battery. His button eyes never blinked, but now, he watched everything. I installed motion-detecting trail cams near the back of my greenhouse and hid a voice recorder in the birdhouse by my porch. And guess what? Within 3 days, I had footage of my sister-in-law, yes, the same one who hugged me at Easter, tossing dead animals over my fence at night. Possums. Chickens. Even a snake. She wanted the neighbors to think I was attracting death. The next morning, she marched into the corner cafe and announced, "I had a dream last night." Ruth Ann's spirit came to me in a black veil and said she'd take my youngest. People gasped. Some crossed themselves. One woman dropped her coffee. Now, normally, I'd laugh. But that very afternoon, her own toddler tripped on the sidewalk and bruised his elbow. Not serious, but enough for the whispers to start. They were setting me up. And if I didn't act fast, they'd win the town before I had the chance to speak. I took a bold step. I contacted Darnell, a 28-year-old documentary filmmaker who used to intern at the local news station. I'd seen his short films on YouTube, exposing corrupt landlords and fake charities. I sent him the footage. He called me 2 hours later and said, "This is unreal. I'm in." By the next weekend, he and 2 quiet camera guys were sleeping in my guest room, pretending to be city relatives. In truth, they were filming 24/7. The plan was simple: let them keep digging their own grave. Let them say their spells. Let them fake their bruises and forged visions. I'd collect every second. And then? I'd make them famous. And here's the twist. The town didn't fully believe I was a witch. But they wanted to. Because blaming me for their misfortunes made them feel safe. Like if they avoided my land, or didn't accept my homegrown tomatoes, they could dodge bad luck. Superstition gave them power. But I was about to take that power back. The most damning moment came during a staged prayer circle in my cousin's barn. My niece, who claimed to be clairaudient, was caught on hidden mic saying, "If Ruth signs over the land, we'll stop the visions." That clip? That was my Excalibur. I wasn't scared anymore. I was building a case. But I wasn't doing it quietly. I was scripting a takedown. And the next step was turning their hex into headlines. You'd think the 1600s ended witch trials. But let me tell you what happened the Sunday after I started filming. I walked into church with a fresh pie for the potluck, and walked out with a sermon pinned to my back. Pastor Gordon, who baptized my husband and once helped me fix a chicken wire fence, got up on that pulpit with sweat on his collar and rage in his voice. He didn't say my name. Oh no, too clever for that. He said, "Beware the false prophetess in our midst. The one who stirs potions instead of prayer. Who plants seeds of bitterness, not fruit." The whole room turned toward me. My pie of rhubarb and strawberry sat untouched on the end table like it was poisoned. That night, someone left a burned bundle of sage tied with red string on my doorstep. That wasn't spiritual. That was a warning. A curse, maybe. But they forgot something. I don't run. I don't break. I document. Darnell and his crew watched in disbelief as I played them the recording of the entire sermon. "This is gold," he whispered. But to me, it wasn't gold. It was gasoline. And I was collecting every match they threw. Let me back up a bit. My family, my own blood, had filed a quiet petition with the county to have me evaluated for spiritual delusions and paranoid behavior. They cited the burned animals, the rumors, and now the pastor's sermon. They claimed I was unstable, a danger to myself and possibly others. They even dragged out an old prescription I'd taken for mild anxiety after my husband died. Suddenly that made me a lunatic? But here's what they didn't know: I had already filed a notice with the sheriff's office. I had already submitted copies of those anonymous letters, the camera footage, and the forged spiritual counselor documents they'd written. And best of all, I had a retired judge from Kansas, an old friend of my husband's, watching everything from afar. He'd seen this before. Not with witches. With property theft. Land grabs hidden behind mental illness claims. Meanwhile, the town grew divided. Half whispered that I'd always been strange. The other half remembered the apple pies I baked for school fundraisers and the time I helped rebuild the church roof. I wasn't just a woman anymore. I was a story. And that's when it happened. An online forum for American folklore and modern superstition picked up my case. One of Darnell's teaser clips leaked. It showed me calmly explaining how my family set up fake hexes and tried to institutionalize me to seize my land. The video went viral overnight. Witch Hunt in 2024, the headlines read. Suddenly, reporters were calling. Activists. Legal advisors. Even witches, real ones, offered to support me. Irony, right? But my family? They panicked. That same night, I caught my nephew sneaking into my garage. He thought he'd find evidence to twist against me. Instead, he got caught on 3 cameras and tripped a booby-trapped bucket of purple paint I'd rigged like an old Halloween gag. He ran out screaming, coated in violet like a bruised ghost. Darnell filmed it. We named the clip "The Sorcerer's Nephew." I wasn't afraid anymore. I was armed. Not with spells. Not with curses. With truth. With evidence. With momentum. And now the fire they tried to light beneath me? I was going to aim it straight back at them, through a camera lens. They say courtrooms are places of justice. But let me tell you something: when your own family accuses you of being mentally unfit, a courtroom can feel like a coffin. And that's exactly what they wanted, to bury me in paperwork, in lies, in whispers spoken with folded hands and tearful eyes. My brother, my niece, even my godson, sat there in pressed suits claiming I had delusions of control, that I believed I could speak to shadows and curse harvests with eye contact. I wish I were joking. They filed under order for adult guardianship on grounds of delusion and danger to self and others. Fancy language for, let's make the old lady seem crazy and take her land. They presented fake witness statements from neighbors I hadn't even spoken to in months, citing erratic behavior, muttering in Latin, I was reading Harry Potter, for God's sake, and even performing blood rituals with chickens. I raise chickens. I don't sacrifice them. But here's where their broomstick snapped in half. See, while they brought superstition, I brought strategy. And video. And timelines. And signatures that didn't match. The judge, bless him, didn't flinch when I rolled out a television cart with a labeled USB stick, Exhibit Ruth End, reality check. It was 27 minutes of spliced clips showing my sister-in-law planting voodoo bones under my porch. They were chicken wings from KFC. My nephew practicing his fainting spell in front of a mirror. My niece writing 2 versions of a divine message on my bathroom mirror using lipstick. I watched their faces pale as every lie fell apart in real time. The courtroom wasn't silent, it hummed. That kind of quiet where even the air holds its breath. But I wasn't done. I had printed the forged spiritual advisor letters, complete with overlapping ink smudges and identical handwriting patterns. I had the parcel tracking numbers for the anonymous warnings they sent me, showing the return address linked back to my niece's college dorm. I even had footage of a family meeting, recorded through my scarecrow, where my brother said, "Once the court grants us guardianship, the land's as good as ours. She'll be too medicated to notice." Game. Set. Fire. The judge threw the petition out with disgust. Called it an appalling abuse of the mental health system for financial gain. But I didn't just walk out vindicated. I walked out with a counter case: defamation, property interference, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My lawyer, pro bono thanks to the viral doc, filed the suit within the hour. And as we left that courthouse, Darnell filmed me walking down those steps in a black wide-brimmed hat and a green coat. Someone later edited the footage and added a remix of Season of the Witch. It got 5.2 million views. People started calling me the legal witch of Missouri. But I wasn't just going viral, I was going vengeful. And with every clip, every headline, every article, the legend of the so-called witch grew. Except this time, I wasn't the villain in the story. I was the author. You ever watch someone pretend to cry while checking if they're on camera? That's exactly what my niece did the day she came to apologize. After the court threw out their case and my documentary clip hit millions online, my family didn't show up at my gate with flowers, they showed up with an agenda. I knew it the second I saw them: my niece wearing a soft pink cardigan, my brother holding a pie he clearly didn't bake, and my godson filming on his phone like we were on some fake redemption tour. She sniffled, looked at the lens, and said, "Aunt Ruth Ann, we never meant harm. We were just scared for you." Scared? They tried to medicate me into silence and commit me for profit. But I didn't interrupt. I just tilted my head and smiled. Because what they didn't know was that I'd invited Darnell back, again, and he was filming from behind the barn. With better lighting. A wider lens. And a backup mic. They didn't come to make peace. They came to manage their reputation. Because while I was clearing my name, their employers, neighbors, and even the local PTA had questions. Their fake witch hunt had turned into a real investigation into everything else they'd done: taxes, school board votes, misused donations. Their names were now headlines. And the world was watching. So I gave them exactly what they came for: a stage. I let them speak. I let them cry. And when they finished their monologue, I invited them inside for tea. Chamomile, of course, nothing spooky. We sat at my old kitchen table, where they used to eat cornbread and gravy with my late husband. And then I handed them each a manila envelope. Inside? A copy of the new property trust. One I'd legally structured to protect my land from any future claims, theft, or inheritance fights. The title was no longer just in my name, it was in a conservation trust, partnered with a historical preservation group. My land was untouchable. Even if I died tomorrow, they'd never see a blade of its grass. My niece read the paper and gasped, "But, this says we're not beneficiaries at all." I sipped my tea. Correct. Because witches don't have heirs. Only legacies. My brother slammed his envelope down. "You're doing this out of spite." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing this out of wisdom. You tried to brand me unstable, remember? I'm just protecting myself from dangerous people." They left red-faced and shaking, but here's the real twist: Darnell released the apology footage side by side with their earlier lies from the documentary. A split-screen masterpiece, their fake repentance on one side, their secret schemes from hidden mics on the other. The internet ate it up. One blogger titled it, "The Witch Outsmarted the Wolves, Again." Oh, and the pie they brought? I fed it to my pigs. They had better taste. Now, with the land locked away and my name trending on legal TikTok, I wasn't just a woman who survived slander. I was an icon of modern resistance. I got interview offers from podcasts, true crime channels, even a daytime talk show that asked me to dress up in witch garb. I declined the costume. My truth was enough. And I wasn't done yet. You know what you do when people call you cursed? You bless them louder. After the trial, after the documentary, after the pie-fed pigs and viral apology clips, I sat on my porch with a glass of cold lemonade and asked myself, what do I do now? I had my land. I had my name back. I had a bank account fuller than it had been in years, thanks to the film rights and licensing. But I didn't want revenge to be the only legacy they remembered. So I stood up, walked to my old barn, and stared at its faded red wood and crooked doors. The same barn my family claimed I used for rituals. The same barn that held feed sacks, rusted tools, and more cobwebs than any real danger. And I said out loud, if they think this is where magic happens, then maybe it should be. I called it the hearth. That's what I named it. I transformed my barn into a community center for women over 50. A sanctuary for the overlooked, the overworked, and the silenced. Yoga mats replaced hay bales. Herbs hung from the rafters, real herbs, not the ones they said I used to summon spirits. I taught canning classes, herbal medicine workshops, and hosted grief circles for women like me who lost husbands and were told to move on in silence. But here's the part that really shook the town. I didn't just host healing events, I turned it into a business. Retreats. Pop-up markets. A publishing workshop for rural women writing their memoirs. And every event sold out. Women drove from counties away, curious to meet the witch who won. I gave tours of the old scarecrow, still standing, still watching, and joked that he was my security guard. I even made little replicas of him and sold them at the market. Guess what? They became collector's items. One woman told me she kept hers on her bookshelf to ward off toxic in-laws. But it wasn't just crafts and candles. It was change. One woman confessed she was being manipulated by her son-in-law into signing over her home. Another had been called unstable by her niece when she refused to babysit for free. We laughed, we cried, we shared stories that sounded eerily like mine, and I realized something. I wasn't the only one who'd been branded a witch for being inconvenient. And my family? Oh, they fumed. They still lived nearby. Every car that drove past their house on the way to my healing barn burned them a little more. My niece tried to host her own wellness day at the community center. No one came. She posted bitter TikToks, calling me a fraud, a manipulator, a fake feminist. I didn't reply. I just filmed a video of myself sipping tea by the barn sign and captioned it, "Healing isn't loud. It just lasts longer." And guess what? That went viral too. So now, every Friday evening, I light a candle, not for spells, but for the women who walk through my barn doors and finally exhale. The ones who've been accused, dismissed, or betrayed. We don't wear cloaks. We wear courage. And we laugh. Loud. Because in the place where they tried to burn my life down, I built warmth instead. And the hearth? It's booked till next spring. It was a Sunday afternoon in October. The kind of golden crisp day where the light falls sideways through the trees and everything feels still, like the land's holding its breath. I was inside the hearth, laying out lemon balm bundles for the herb swap, when I saw an old sedan crawl up the gravel path. Dust kicked up behind it like a ghost in pursuit. I didn't recognize the car, but when the door opened, I nearly dropped my kettle. It was Clara. My late husband's youngest cousin. The one who hadn't set foot on my land since the funeral 8 years ago. She was always soft-spoken, always had that nervous smile like she knew too much and said too little. Back then, she drifted between family reunions like a shadow in pastels. I hadn't heard a word from her in years. But now, there she was, walking toward my barn in jeans and a flannel, holding something in her hands, a worn notebook, hugged to her chest like a secret. "I need to talk to you, Ruth Ann," she said. "I should have come a long time ago. I made tea. Set it on the table beside the guest rocking chair. She didn't sit at first. She paced. Her hands trembled, her eyes rimmed red, not from sadness, but shame. And then, slowly, she told me the truth that cracked open everything I thought I knew. Clara had been the spark. Not the whole fire. But the match. She admitted she was the first one to tell my niece that I had a shadow around me. Said it at a family dinner as a joke, after I refused to loan my greenhouse to her church group. I didn't mean it seriously, she whispered, voice breaking. But Emma believed me. She ran with it. And once the rumors started, I didn't stop them. I thought, maybe you'd leave. Maybe the land would come to the rest of us. It was selfish. And it got out of control. She slid the notebook toward me. Inside were letters. Her own journals. Her guilty mind had written it all down. Detailed plans, overheard conversations, even sketches of the ritual circle my niece staged behind my barn. She documented everything, but kept silent until now. I should have screamed. Should have thrown her off my porch. But I didn't. Because sometimes silence is the apology. I don't want anything, she said. I just want to tell the truth. On record. For your film. For court. For you. We filmed her testimony that evening in the barn, fairy lights glowing, wind whispering through the eaves. Darnell cried when he watched the footage. It wasn't just an admission, it was a reconstruction. Proof that everything I claimed wasn't just reactive, it was real. The missing link. I didn't hug her. I didn't forgive her right away. But I let her stay for the moon circle that night. She sat quietly, hands folded, listening to women speak their pain aloud. When she left, she placed a sprig of rosemary at the base of my scarecrow. Not a hex. A hope. And in that moment, I realized the story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting fear into truth. Page by page. You ever see a lie unravel in real time? Not just slip, but explode? That's what happened when Clara's video dropped. We released her confession on a Thursday morning. Quietly. No press, no drama. Just one YouTube upload titled, "The Truth Behind the Witch Hunt, Clara Speaks." It was 11 minutes and 14 seconds long. No music. No edits. Just her voice, shaking, as she exposed the entire conspiracy, how it started as a family joke, how they forged evidence, staged incidents, manipulated local leaders, and tried to gaslight me into an early grave for acreage and inheritance. By lunchtime, the video had 120,000 views. By dinnertime, 500,000. Hashtags flooded social media, hashtag WitchTrial2024, hashtag BelieveRuthann, hashtag Land Not Lies. People weren't just watching, they were outraged. Journalists picked it up. Legal bloggers dissected the confession line by line. One forensic handwriting analyst even posted a side-by-side breakdown of the forged spiritual advisor letters and my niece's old homework. Identical curls on the Ys, she said. And then came the fallout. My niece? Fired from her job at a child education nonprofit. The board said ethical concerns made her position untenable. My brother? Shunned by his own congregation after the pastor received dozens of emails with time-stamped clips of him mocking my mental health behind my back. Even my godson, who once called me a dusty old fraud, was forced to resign from a small-town political campaign he had just launched. Turns out, people don't like when you try to stage mental illness for profit. I didn't lift a finger. Didn't respond. Didn't gloat. But the world? Oh, it dragged them. One late-night host called it the most terrifying real-life horror film since Get Out, but make it rural. Another podcast called me the modern-day Salem survivor who turned superstition into strategy. And my favorite? A meme of me stirring tea on my porch, captioned, "Don't make me open the book." I wrote it. But beneath all the public humiliation was something far more powerful: validation. Strangers messaged me from Poland, Brazil, South Africa. Women who'd been labeled crazy by in-laws, neighbors, or ex-husbands. People told me my story made them brave. That they started documenting. That they stopped apologizing for surviving. And yet, the best part? The local council formally apologized. Issued a public statement acknowledging the damage their silence and inaction caused. They offered to name part of the wooded trail after me, Ruth Ann's Path. I declined the naming. I didn't want a plaque. I wanted a policy. So I worked with a state senator, yes, me, to draft a bill protecting landowners from psychological manipulation in inheritance cases. They called it the Ruth Ann Clause. And my family? They vanished from public life. No more interviews. No more TikToks. Just silence. Until one anonymous letter arrived at my gate, with 6 words in shaky handwriting: "We didn't know you'd fight back." I didn't respond. I just smiled. Because I wasn't fighting back anymore. I was winning forward. Let me paint the picture for you. I'm sitting in the hearth, patchouli candles flickering, the afternoon sun warming the old barnwood walls, when my new landline rings. It's a Los Angeles number. At first, I let it go to voicemail, because let's be real, LA doesn't usually have good news for women like me. But something told me to call back. "Miss Clark," the voice on the other end said. "This is Vanessa from Foresky Studios. We're calling to express interest in optioning your story. Documentary rights, possibly scripted. It's powerful. It's timely. It's got teeth." I raised an eyebrow. Teeth, huh? That's one way to describe a witch trial in 2024. They offered numbers. Big ones. Bigger than I'd ever seen in my life, enough to turn my barn into a wellness resort, enough to buy every acre around me if I wanted. But there was a catch. Isn't there always? "We just have a few creative adjustments in mind," Vanessa said sweetly. "For broader appeal. We'd need to, soften the ending. Maybe make the family more redeemable. And perhaps make your character a little more vulnerable. Less sharp. Less confrontational." I laughed so loud the chickens in my yard clucked back. "You want me soft?" I asked. "You want to take a woman who got framed, gaslit, nearly institutionalized, and won, and make her a little more palatable so the audience doesn't feel bad for her abusers?" "Well, viewers prefer nuance," she said. "No," I said. "They prefer truth. And you don't get to sanitize mine." They offered more money. Said they'd bring in a seasoned screenwriter. I told them I'd already lived the script. And that I didn't need their version of me nodding tearfully at a dinner table forgiveness scene. My real story ended with protection, power, and legacy, not pity. So I made my own offer. "You want the rights? You take my ending, my edits, and you hire a woman over 60 to play me. Not some 38-year-old with a gray wig and Botox." She hesitated. "That's very specific." "No," I said, "that's accurate." They backed off. For now. But here's the twist: a week later, a smaller indie studio reached out. Run by women. Real women. One of them had been disinherited by her own family for refusing to sell ancestral land. She got it. They didn't want to change my ending. They wanted to amplify it. So now, we're in pre-production for a film titled Ashes and Acreage, the Ruth Ann Clark story. And I'm co-producing it. Because no one tells my story but me. I've come to learn something about stories: people will always try to buy your silence, or rewrite your truth into something they can stomach. But if you own the pen, they don't get a chapter unless you say so. So, Let me take you to Harvest Hollow Weekend, a small-town fall festival with kettle corn, handmade soaps, hay rides, and a brand new addition, the Hearth Circle, a tribute to Ruth and Clark's journey from folklore to fact. That's right. The town that once muttered hexes behind my back was now handing out commemorative mugs with my silhouette on them. Funny, isn't it? It wasn't my idea. It was the mayor's. After seeing the viral documentary and the new legislation named after me, they wanted to make it right. We can't change the past, he said, but we can honor the fire you walked through. So I agreed, but on one condition: no whitewashing. I didn't want a sugar-coated story or a smiling reenactment of my trauma. I wanted truth. Real exhibits. Real footage. Real consequences. And boy, did that make some folks squirm. See, not everyone in town was thrilled about the festival honoring the woman who made us look like superstitious fools. Some people still clung to the old stories. One church group circulated flyers with my face and the words "Modern Jezebel, beware her influence." Someone slipped a dead crow onto the hearth's front steps. Cute, right? A little throwback. But I didn't blink. I put the crow in a box, wrote Exhibit A, Attempted Intimidation, 2024 on it, and added it to the festival display. Let them see the kind of nonsense I'd lived through. The real sabotage came during the final night. The town had planned a bonfire, symbolic, they said, to represent burning away lies and fear. I was scheduled to give a short speech before it was lit. But an hour before it started, one of my volunteers found something stuffed into the base of the woodpile: fire accelerant-soaked papers and a small audio device that, when triggered, would have played eerie, demonic chanting over hidden speakers. A full-on attempt to reframe the event as a satanic ritual, on my land. You believe that? I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. They thought they were going to humiliate me in front of hundreds of festival-goers, local press, and live-streaming guests. Nope. We removed the device. But instead of keeping quiet, I rewrote the plan. I walked up to the mic, looked out at the faces, some supportive, some still suspicious, and I held up the bag of soaked papers and the speaker. Tonight, I said, someone tried to bring the witch trial back. Right here. Right now. They thought this fire would turn from symbolic to scandal. But they forgot, I am the flame. People gasped. Phones came out. I wasn't shaken. I was on fire. I told the crowd exactly what had happened. Showed them the sabotage. Explained how they'd tried to weaponize fear again. And then I handed the match to a woman from our healing circle, one who'd been publicly shamed by her family for leaving a toxic marriage, and she lit the bonfire. It roared. Not with fear. With freedom. We sang. We danced. Someone brought out cider. The mood shifted from tense to electric. And when I looked around, I realized this was no longer about me. It was about all of us, everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, gaslit, or ghosted for daring to speak truth. And the best part? That audio recording from the sabotage attempt? Darnell uploaded it, overlaid with my speech, and titled it, "They Tried to Curse Us Again." But we lit the fire first. 10 million views. 1 week. You know the saying, when you corner a snake, it either slithers away or strikes. Well, mine tried to strike, in court. Again. 2 months after the festival bonfire, I received a thick envelope, hand-delivered. Not by a sheriff this time, but by a private courier dressed like he worked for someone important. Inside? A lawsuit. My niece, my brother, and my godson were suing me for emotional distress, reputational harm, and intentional defamation. The same people who tried to brand me as mentally ill, erase my autonomy, steal my land, and stage a modern-day witch hunt, they were now claiming I had ruined their lives. They said the documentary cost them jobs. That public humiliation led to deep psychological suffering. That my decision to broadcast private family matters for entertainment caused irreparable mental trauma. I sat at my kitchen table, rereading the phrase irreparable mental trauma, and said out loud, I've got just the trauma for them. I didn't panic. I brewed tea. I called my lawyer. And then, I called Darnell. Because if they wanted court, I'd bring a courtroom. And a director's cut. Now here's the part you'll love, we didn't just defend the case. We countered it, with a public record of over 64 hours of footage, including every whisper, every fake letter, every smug joke they made during their plan to destroy me. Including that infamous quote from my brother, we'll say she's crazy until she signs the deed or dies. Whichever comes first. Yeah. That was in the courtroom. The judge was new. Young. Sharp. She'd seen the documentary already. She said, I'm familiar with the case, but I'm here to evaluate whether the defendant, that's me, acted maliciously or truthfully. And I smiled, because my truth was a stack of hard drives and notarized transcripts. My lawyer played clips of me being stalked, recorded, harassed. Played the church sermon that demonized me. Showed their attempt to reframe the bonfire as some ritual. Then, because irony is a wicked friend, we played Clara's confession. Full screen. Loud. Crystal clear audio. At one point, my niece started crying in the courtroom. My godson tried to walk out. The judge ordered him back to his seat. They looked like cornered children trying to blame the babysitter for their bruised egos. And then I took the stand. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I simply said, I didn't tell the world what happened to ruin them. I told the truth to rescue myself. If they're ashamed now, it's because they finally heard what they sounded like. I didn't ruin their reputations. They recorded their own downfall, I just gave it a better edit. The judge ruled in my favor. Denied their claim. And issued a scathing opinion that said, quote, public exposure of truth is not defamation. Especially when the truth was filmed, documented, and nearly silenced through coordinated coercion. And then, this part gives me goosebumps, she awarded me $12,000 in legal reimbursement for the emotional toll of defending myself against their lies, again. They walked out humiliated. Again. Only this time, the headline read, Family sues which for emotional damage, loses in flames. And me? I used the money to add a new sign outside the hearth. It reads, Hex is welcome. Lawsuits not recommended. It arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning, tucked between a seed catalog and a thank you card from one of my wellness retreat guests. I almost didn't notice it, plain white envelope, no return address, handwriting like someone hadn't used a pen in years. But when I saw the name in the corner, my hands froze. Eleanor Addington. If that name doesn't ring a bell, I don't blame you. She wasn't in the documentary. She wasn't mentioned in court. But once upon a time, she was everything. My mother's best friend. My godmother, technically. And my first real mentor when I was a wild-haired 17-year-old girl with dirt under my fingernails and too many questions. She taught me to grow herbs. To trust the moon. To write things down when no one would listen. She left town in the 80s after a scandal, the kind whispered about in church parking lots but never printed in the paper. I never knew what really happened. All I knew was one day she was gone, and everyone said good riddance. I hadn't seen her since. Until now. The letter inside was 7 pages, handwritten in violet ink, with the scent of dried lavender still clinging to the folds. I sat down with a mug of rosehip tea and read it once. Then twice. And by the third read, I felt the earth shift beneath me. Because Eleanor didn't just write to say hello. She wrote to warn me. She told me that back in 1985, just after my father passed, my mother's side of the family had gathered in secret, discussing what would happen to the land. I was still a teenager. Quiet. Naive. And apparently, my name being on the inheritance enraged them. Especially my uncle, now long dead, and his children, one of whom would go on to become my niece's godfather. Yeah. The strings run deep. Eleanor said she'd overheard the conversation through a screen door. Said she remembered the exact words, "We'll raise her, but that land is ours. If we can't take it now, we'll take it later. One way or another." They called me too young then. Too strange. But Eleanor warned my mother, who dismissed it as paranoia. She said she tried to warn me years later, but by then she was persona non grata, labeled a witch herself, cast out, mocked. She left town not out of shame, but for my safety. She'd been followed. Threatened. Told to stay out of family business. She'd been waiting all this time, hoping I'd survive it. And when she saw my face on that documentary trailer, The Witch Who Outsmarted Them All, she knew it was time to tell the truth. I was never crazy. I was targeted from the beginning. I stared at the last line of her letter for a long time. It read, "Ruth Ann, your story started long before you were old enough to write it. But you're the one who gets to finish it now." I cried. Not because I was angry, but because somewhere in my bones, I already knew. And now it was confirmed. They didn't come after me because I cursed them. They cursed me with fear, silence, and stolen history, and they did it generation after generation. But no more. I called Eleanor. Her voice was older, but strong. We talked for 3 hours. She's living on the edge of Oregon now, still growing herbs, still scribbling in notebooks. She told me she kept a box of evidence, clippings, letters, notes. "If you want it," she said, "it's yours." You bet I said yes. I flew to Oregon with a carry-on bag, an old notebook, and a storm in my chest. I hadn't been on a plane in 20 years. But when a woman like Eleanor Addington tells you she's been holding on to secrets that shaped your entire life, you don't wait. You go. Even if it means leaving behind your chickens and your land for 3 days and flying into a cold mist with no guarantee except gut instinct. She met me at the airport in a faded green coat, gray braid over her shoulder, and eyes that looked like they'd watched too many people tell lies and call it family. We didn't hug at first. We just looked at each other, like two timelines finally meeting at the seam. And then she said, "You're taller than your mother," and I laughed so hard I almost cried. Her home was small, cedar walls, overgrown garden, stacks of journals beside every window. But what mattered was the trunk in her attic. Iron hinges. Smelled like cedar and old secrets. She opened it like she was offering me a heart she'd been keeping safe. Inside? Documents. Letters. Newspaper clippings. Not just about me. About my grandmother. Turns out, I wasn't the first Clark woman to be accused of being dangerous. My grandmother, Cora May, had been reported to the sheriff in 1948 for public disturbances, unlicensed herbal practices, and improper burial of livestock. Know what that actually meant? She delivered babies when the doctors turned women away. She grew her own medicine. And when a local man beat his wife and showed up with bruises on his face the next day, everyone assumed Cora hexed him. No charges ever stuck, but the whispers? They never stopped. Eleanor had records. Letters from local church leaders warning her to stay clear of the Clark women. A diary entry from Cora herself that read, "They fear what they can't control. But they forget, we plant things too. Like truth. And it always grows back." And then, the smoking gun. A deed modification draft from 1986. Written in my uncle's handwriting. Never filed, but signed and witnessed. It outlined a plan to transfer the property temporarily to another family member, guess who? My cousin's now deceased husband, under the claim that I was unfit due to spiritual instability. They'd been planning this for decades. Planting lies like seeds. Watering them with gossip. Waiting for me to grow tired enough, or scared enough, to hand the land over. The whole 2024 witch scheme. It wasn't spontaneous. It was legacy fraud. I spent 2 days with Eleanor going through every document. Took scans. Notes. Photographed it all. She gave me permission to use whatever I needed. And before I left, we sat on her porch and watched the Oregon fog roll in. She turned to me and said, "They tried to erase your story before it began. But they forgot, you're your grandmother's granddaughter. And we don't disappear. We document." I flew home changed. Not just a survivor, not just a symbol. I was a historian of resistance. A woman who had a lineage of resilience. A legacy of being inconvenient and unbreakable. They say truth sets you free, but they never tell you how loud it gets when it starts echoing down the halls of power. I came home from Oregon carrying more than scanned documents and an old woman's wisdom. I carried a legacy of silencing. A pattern. A paper trail. And this time, I wasn't going to just keep it in my personal files. I partnered with a small but fierce team of investigative journalists who had covered wrongful conservatorship and rural land fraud cases across the country. They didn't blink at the phrase generational witchbaiting. They asked for receipts, and I handed them a digital drive labeled Clark Archive. They tried before. What followed was a 5-part exposé called The Inheritance Trap: Rural America's Quiet Wars, published online by a respected media outlet. It didn't just include my story. It spanned decades: Cora May's accusations, Eleanor's exile, my mother's silent compliance, and my family's long-standing attempts to manipulate land inheritance under the guise of concern for mental instability. And in the middle of all of it? That never-filed 1986 deed draft. Signed. Witnessed. And proof of an intent to bypass legal channels. The article dropped on a Monday. By Wednesday, the state attorney general's office had opened an inquiry into 3 local families, including my own. Turns out, my case wasn't the only one like it. Once the article went viral, other women, quiet widows, spinsters, herbalists, healers, came forward with stories nearly identical to mine. Their families claimed they were unstable. Some were locked up. Others were tricked into selling land for pennies. One woman from Louisiana messaged me. They told everyone I was hearing voices. What I was actually hearing was the truth no one wanted spoken. You made me brave enough to say it. And now the state was listening, too. Investigators requested access to my original footage, my court filings, and, get this, the recordings from my scarecrow camera. I handed it all over with a grin. Every leaf-rustling second of it. My brother was subpoenaed. So was my niece. They tried to act shocked, tried to pretend the whole thing was just family drama taken out of context. But you can't out-context a 30-year pattern. You can't lie your way out of timelines and timestamps. Especially not when you left your footprints all over the digital dirt. And me? I didn't hide. I sat down for interviews. I spoke at town meetings. I wore my truth like armor. At one press conference, a young reporter asked me, "Do you think you've become a symbol?" I smiled and said, "I'm not a symbol. I'm a record keeper. And the difference is, symbols can be erased. Records stay filed." The hearth became more than a sanctuary, it became a hub for victims of inheritance manipulation across the state. We hosted free legal clinics. Trauma writing workshops. I started a newsletter called the Red Ribbon Registry, where women could share their stories anonymously and connect with others who refused to be buried quietly. And then, an old ally surprised me. Eleanor's testimony was requested, formally. After 4 decades of silence, the state now wanted her account. And she said yes. It's funny, isn't it? How the people who spend their lives pretending they're righteous are the first ones to panic when truth shows up with a spine and a subpoena. Eleanor Addington, 81 years old, long gray braids swinging like a rope of defiance, agreed to return to Missouri to testify before the state commission investigating inheritance fraud and targeted coercion against women, especially those branded unstable by family. And the moment her name appeared on the witness list, the town buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. See, the people who exiled Eleanor decades ago weren't strangers, they were relatives. Old family friends. People whose grandchildren now sat in county offices and church committees. Her return wasn't just testimony, it was threat. It was memory turned weapon. She arrived 3 days before the hearing, and I picked her up myself. Same green coat, same firm handshake. But now, we were no longer the outcasts. We were the storm. The hearth was packed with volunteers prepping for her stay, women with casseroles, herbal compresses, and notebooks ready for more truth. And for the first 48 hours, all was calm. Until the third night. Eleanor and I had just finished a fire circle with a few survivors when I noticed the barn lights flickering. I thought it was the wind. But when we stepped outside, we saw it, the scarecrow, Henry, had been knocked over. Torn at the seams. And something was stuffed inside him. A letter. Typewritten. Anonymous. It read, "If Eleanor testifies, you'll regret digging up the past. Some things die for a reason." My hands didn't shake. Not this time. I called the sheriff. He arrived within the hour. We gave him the letter, the footage from our new security cameras. Yes, I'd upgraded Henry, and the tire tracks in the back pasture. We didn't hide it. We posted it. Darnell filmed Eleanor reading the letter aloud the next morning. She looked straight into the lens and said, "I died in their story once already. I'm not dying in silence again." We released that clip the same afternoon. Over 3 million views by dinner. Hashtags trended again. Hashtag Eleanor returns. Hashtag the witch was right. The hearing? Electric. Eleanor sat before a panel of state officials and calmly, precisely, surgically unraveled the entire generational conspiracy. She named names. Gave dates. Provided letters and testimonies. Described how women like my grandmother and I were used, loved when quiet, hated when strong. At one point, when asked why she hadn't come forward earlier, she said, "Because back then, speaking up got you locked away. But now? It gets you a microphone." She ended her testimony by placing Cora May's 1948 diary on the desk and saying, "This is our Bible. The gospel of every woman you tried to bury alive." The room fell into the kind of silence that can split stone. After the hearing, I escorted Eleanor back to the hearth. Dozens of women waited there with candles, letters, and warm meals. One of them, a teenager, handed Eleanor a paper and whispered, "You made me believe I don't have to shrink to survive." And just when I thought the worst was over, my niece showed up at my gate. Pale, frantic, eyes wild. She wasn't there to apologize. She was there to confess something she hadn't told anyone else. Something even I wasn't ready for. She looked like a ghost when she arrived, my niece Emma. No makeup, hoodie pulled over her head, biting the skin around her thumbnail like she was trying to disappear into herself. She didn't knock. Just stood at my gate, trembling. I was sipping dandelion tea on the porch, watching the dusk roll in, when I saw her silhouette in the fading light. For a second, I thought it was another reporter. Or worse, someone coming to spray paint witch on my fence again. But then I saw her eyes. And I knew. This wasn't malice. This was collapse. I walked down the gravel path in silence. She didn't speak until I opened the gate. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And you need to hear it from me, not from a courtroom. Not from a lawyer." I didn't say a word. I just nodded. We sat inside the hearth, surrounded by the glow of salt lamps and shelves of dried herbs. I made her tea, lavender and lemon balm, for courage. And then, like a dam snapping at its weakest seam, the truth came spilling out. "I didn't start it," she whispered. I didn't come up with the idea to take your land. I went along with it. I forged things, yes. I lied. But it wasn't me who planted the seed. I leaned in. Then who did? She swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. It was Grandma. Silence. At first, I thought she meant my mother. But she didn't. She meant her grandmother. My husband's mother. Josephine Clark. Dead 10 years. Buried with pearls and a Bible. She told us you were dangerous, Emma continued. That you'd tricked Grandpa into signing the land over before he died. That your rituals were embarrassing the family. She called you a disgrace. Said your herbs were a front for manipulation. She convinced Dad. Then Uncle Marcus. And then me. My mouth was dry. Because Josephine had always treated me like a stray dog, tolerated, but never loved. Civil at holidays, cold in private. I just thought it was a generational thing. Turns out? It was warfare with a smile. She said if we waited too long, Emma went on, you'd rewrite everything. And that land belonged to the Clark name. Not to someone who buried jars under trees and read moon charts. I laughed. Bitterly. Those jars were pickled beets. Emma didn't laugh. She was crying now. She made me believe I was protecting the family. But I was protecting a lie. And then, when we started forging letters, she was gone. But her words were still in us. And by then, we were in too deep to stop. She handed me something wrapped in a velvet pouch. It was a cassette tape. Labeled in cursive, for the Clark Legacy, 1996. I found it in a box in Dad's attic, she said. I think it's Josephine's voice. I haven't listened. I couldn't. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Emma looked up at me, her face blotchy, ashamed. I know it doesn't undo what I did. But I'm tired of living with ghosts. And you're the only one who ever made the house feel alive. She left after that. No hugs. No dramatic exits. Just a girl peeling back generations of rot and hoping it wouldn't swallow her whole. That night, I sat in the hearth alone, cassette in hand, wondering how far back the lies went. I knew one thing: if that tape held what I thought it did, Josephine wasn't just the whisper behind the curtain. She was the puppeteer. It took me 2 hours to work up the courage to play the tape. Not because I was afraid of ghosts, but because I already knew what it was going to confirm. That everything I'd lived through, every accusation, every forged letter, every cruel whisper about herbs and energy, wasn't spontaneous. It was a plan. A legacy. I borrowed an old cassette player from Darnell's storage bin of vintage equipment. Sat in my kitchen with the lights low, the windows closed, the tea gone cold. I pressed play. The click was sharp. The hiss of tape filled the room. Then, if you're hearing this, it means you've finally grown a spine. Her voice. Josephine Clark. Clear. Calm. So composed it made my teeth ache. This land belongs to the Clark bloodline, and Ruthann, she doesn't understand that. She married in, but she doesn't belong in. Not really. She speaks to weeds. She journals. She burns things in bowls. And people talk. Sooner or later, that talk becomes power. And I won't have my family name tied to witchery and whispers. I froze. She continued. If we're going to reclaim the land, we can't just ask for it. We need documentation. Strategy. If she dies naturally, fine. If she starts losing her mind first, even better. Make sure the right people believe she's unstable. Create distance. Set the narrative. And don't forget, the town believes what it sees, not what it knows. I stopped the tape. Rewound it. Played that last line again. The town believes what it sees, not what it knows. There it was. The playbook. Not just for me, but for my grandmother, my godmother Eleanor, all the women erased, diminished, or quietly smothered by Josephine's long, cold shadow. She wasn't just a controlling matriarch. She was an architect of inherited erasure. And now? She'd left behind her own undoing. I didn't cry. Not this time. I was past tears. I felt rage, but not the wild, flailing kind. The surgical kind. Precise. Focused. I burned a copy of the audio to digital. Logged it. Timestamped it. Sent it to the State Investigation Board and to my legal team. And then I did something even bolder. I played the tape publicly. At the hearth. During our next gathering. Over 50 women sat in chairs, sipping tea, scribbling in notebooks, when Josephine's voice filled the barn. Her poison echoing like prophecy. Some gasped. Some cried. One woman whispered, "She sounds like my own mother." And when the tape ended, I said, "We are not crazy. We are inconvenient." And inconvenient women are always the first ones framed. But not anymore. The tape went viral. Again. Headlines read, "Dead Matriarch's Voice Confirms Generational Plot Against Rural Women." The witch was right, audio tape exposes land seizure scheme. Hashtag Josephina's tape trended for 2 days. The Attorney General requested the original tape. And now? They're adding Josephine Clark posthumously to the ongoing fraud investigation. Yeah. The dead don't get immunity, not when they left detailed instructions on how to erase the living. And Emma? She texted me that night. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I wrote back, "Then help me fix it." The thing about legacies is they don't die when people do, they echo. Especially in daughters. Emma, my niece, had spent her whole life in Josephine Clark's long, cold shadow. Taught to smile politely. To never raise her voice. To obey, to manipulate, to win without ever appearing to fight. She was trained to be a vessel, not a woman. But now, with Josephine's voice echoing across the internet, with the world listening and watching and remembering, Emma stood at a crossroads. She could disappear. Or she could speak. And on a rainy Thursday morning, she knocked on my door. "I'll testify," she said. No hello. No warm-up. Just that. But I want to read a statement. My words. Not yours. Not Josephine's. I didn't hug her. I didn't coddle her. I just nodded. Because I understood what she was doing, it wasn't for me. It was for her. That weekend, we sat together at the hearth. Emma with her laptop, me with tea and space. She wrote all night. Paused sometimes to cry. Sometimes to curse. But by dawn, she had 5 pages that bled honesty. And then the hearing came. State investigators gathered again. The room was packed. Cameras. Reporters. Even a few of the same people who once whispered that I should be put away for her own good. Now they were sitting quietly, afraid they might be next. Emma walked in wearing no makeup, a plain blazer, and a pin with a red ribbon, a symbol we'd adopted for the hearth. She took the stand. Cleared her throat. And began, "My name is Emma Clark. I was raised on Clark land and Clark lies. I was taught that my Aunt Ruthin was unstable. That herbalism was witchcraft. That women who asked questions were dangerous. That land belonged to blood, and that silence was loyalty. I believed them. Until I watched the footage. Until I heard Josephine's voice. Until I realized. I was a tool in a system that devours its women for being inconvenient. I forged letters. I faked stories. I planted evidence. I lied to reporters, to neighbors, to myself. But what I did not do was start the fire. That blueprint came from Josephine. That manipulation came from generations of control disguised as care. I'm here today not as a hero, but as a former enabler who finally chose truth. And if I must lose my reputation to rebuild my soul, so be it. But I will not stay silent while others rot in the same silence I inherited. When she finished, the room sat frozen. The lead investigator, an older woman with iron gray hair and courtroom eyes, leaned forward and said, "Ms. Clark, would you be willing to submit your written statement into public record?" Emma nodded. And with that, the floodgates opened. More women stepped forward. More families unearthed old schemes. Land theft, fake diagnoses, inheritance coercion. It wasn't just my family. It was a pattern. A system built on silencing women and labeling strength as sickness. The state expanded the investigation. Passed an emergency motion to fund a task force. And Emma? She joined the hearth full-time. Not as my niece. Not as a former accomplice. But as a reformer. Together, we co-founded the Clark Initiative, a legal aid and education program for women facing family-based coercion. And our first seminar? Emma taught it. Title? How to Break a Generational Spell. We all waited with our breath held hostage. After months of hearings, testimonies, viral tapes, and ghosts from both the attic and the archive, the state finally handed down its ruling. A courtroom in Jefferson City. 3 long oak tables. One worn-out judge with the weight of generations in her eyes. And me, sitting in the second row, calm as a lake just before a storm. The family sat opposite me, my brother, still stiff in a suit he couldn't afford anymore, my godson, his hand twitching, and Emma, sitting beside me, not with them. The judge cleared her throat. And then came the words, "This court finds that there was a long-standing, coordinated effort by members of the Clark family to fabricate a narrative of mental instability in order to coerce and defraud Ruthann Clark of her inherited property." She said words like premeditated, pattern of manipulation, conspiratorial conduct. She called the cassette tape a historically damning piece of evidence that exposed a deeply rooted abuse of power. She declared the attempt to seize my land not just unethical, but criminally fraudulent. The state wouldn't press charges, for now. But they would be watching. Closely. And then she turned to me. "Miss Clark, you are hereby recognized as sole and permanent steward of the Clark land and its surrounding acreage, with full legal protections under the state's Rural Landowner Guardianship Clause, proposed, ironically, by this very investigation." And just like that, the land was mine again. Not just on paper. But in truth. They couldn't touch it. Ever again. And to ensure that? I did one final thing. I walked out of that courtroom, held a press conference right on the courthouse steps, and announced that I had transferred the land into the Clark Hearth Trust. A non-profit sanctuary for women targeted by family coercion. They couldn't seize it. Couldn't inherit it. Couldn't even step on it without invitation. And I had one more thing to say to the cameras. They tried to turn my life into a cautionary tale. But I made it a curriculum. And the next generation? They won't inherit silence. They'll inherit tools. The footage aired nationwide. Ellen quoted me. A publisher called me that night offering a book deal. But I turned them down. Because I didn't need a book. I had a living legacy. And the Clark family? They vanished into their quiet. Some moved out of state. Some refused to speak to Emma again. Let them. That silence is their inheritance now. The hearth grew. Women arrived weekly. We started a legal hotline. A trauma writing retreat. A traveling exhibit called Witchproof, Stories Buried, Now Told. And me? I finally slept. No locked doors. No whispered threats. No forged signatures behind my back. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of women laughing in my barn, free. But one more thing happened. A letter arrived, unsigned. Just 5 words on fine cream paper, you broke the spell. Finally. I think I know who it came from. Before we begin, if you've walked this entire path with me, from silence to survival, from betrayal to bonfire, thank you. If my story reminded you of your own, or helped you find your voice again, like, share, and subscribe my channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because I want to know which corners of the world our truth is reaching. Now let me tell you how the story ends. It wasn't a courtroom finale. Not a dramatic confrontation or last-minute plot twist. It ended the way real things do, with ceremony. With intention. With remembering. We called it the Night of Names. On the first anniversary of the documentary's release, the hearth held a moonlit vigil for every woman who had ever been labeled dangerous for being different. We filled the field behind the barn with candles, each one carrying the name of a woman who had been silenced, institutionalized, exiled, or erased. Some were from our town. Some from distant counties. Some whose stories came to us anonymously, through letters, emails, whispered confessions in tea circles. Each candle flickered like a small rebellion. Eleanor stood beside me, her braid now white, her hands as steady as the soil she once fled. Emma read a poem. Darnell filmed the whole thing, but said nothing. Some things are too sacred for narration. We didn't cry. We sang. And when the final candle was lit, I stepped forward with one last piece of kindling, a letter. One I wrote to Cora May Clark, my grandmother. The woman who planted strength in secret. I tucked it beside the candle bearing her name, and whispered, they tried to erase us. But you knew we were seeds. The fire rose. Not in destruction, but in honor. The land glowed. And for once, everyone present saw me not as a witch, but as a witness. In the months that followed, the word which began to shift. Women wore it on pins. On t-shirts. Not as fear, but as defiance. As a symbol of women who see too much and stay anyway. Women who burn only when cornered, and blaze when believed. The hearth has grown into a movement. A network. A quiet revolution led by women who once thought they were alone. And me? I still sit on my porch with a cup of tea. Still talk to my scarecrow, though now he has a plaque that reads, Henry, the first to watch and the last to judge. Sometimes I get letters from people I've never met, calling me an icon. But I don't want to be an icon. I want to be a map. A map out of silence. A map towards sovereignty. So if you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of what someone tried to make you believe about yourself, light a candle. Write a letter. Stand in your story and let them call you witch. Because now? The word means she who remembered everything, and still dared to speak. Thank you for hearing me. For believing me. For breaking the spell with me. This story is over. But yours? Is just beginning. If this story touched you, helped you, or reminded you that your truth matters, like, share, and subscribe my channel. Tell me below, where are you watching from? Because somewhere out there, another woman is still waiting to light her first match, and your words might be the spark.